Law and Order, not the show, the thing we have to live with or without. My guest, Clayton Ruby, President, Toronto Police Association. We talk bail reform, morale, what went wrong in Canada, and yes, we talk guns. This is On the Line. This episode of On the Line is brought to you by Universities Canada. Canada's prosperity is built on people with ideas, researchers, scholars, and students, and the universities that support them in shaping our future. Budget 2025 is an opportunity to advance that momentum. Global uncertainty and shifting geopolitics have made this vision even more urgent. A vibrant Canadian research ecosystem is essential, one that generates made-in-Canada solutions, retains top talent, and preserves our technological independence in critical fields. Federal grants and scholarships must be safeguarded, because this isn't just about campuses. It's about the made-in-Canada solutions for our economy, our healthcare system, and our national security. Supporting researchers today secures the talent pipeline and innovation we need for a stronger Canada. Learn more at univcan.ca. Great to have you here for another episode of On the Line. If you like what you hear or what you see, check us out at readtheline.ca. That is our main webpage, and that is where we encourage all of you to go. This is a conversation that I'm planning to have for a while, and you'll actually hear me in a minute talk with Clayton about that. One of the issues I wish did not have to be such a big deal in Canada these days is crime. Public safety, bad guys doing bad things. But I don't get to live in a perfect world. I have to live in this one. And in this world, these are problems we need to talk about. Clayton Campbell is the president of the Toronto Police Association, former law enforcement officer himself. He represents the rank and file officers who keep Canada's largest cities safe. We're going to have a pretty big, wide-ranging conversation here, folks, so stick around for it. And we hope you enjoyed this latest episode of On the Line. Well, you know, it's funny. Clayton Campbell joining me here right now, president of the Toronto Police Association. And it's funny, Clayton, how these things work, because after I came back from being kind of half power before Labor Day, I'm starting to think, what are some of the interviews I want to do? And one of the ones, I had this like on a whiteboard in my house, and I had Cop Plus, meaning either a police officer or someone adjacent to law enforcement to talk about some of the things that have been going on in this country. And then out of the blue, I end up reconnecting with your colleague, Megan, who I knew back when she's with the Toronto Police Association now, but back in the day, she was with Toronto Police in a media relations role. And she said something funny to me. She's like, I didn't know if you'd remember me. I used to get like 19 email releases from her a day. Like, I don't know if I don't know if anyone's name was in my inbox as much as hers. So yes, I remembered her name. We're here to talk law enforcement. And we're here to talk about some of the issues that are facing law enforcement in this country. But I actually want to start with a question, Clayton, that's a little bit more Oprah. Can you tell me what morale is like for rank and file Toronto Police service right now? And then I know you're speaking for those guys, but to the extent you've heard from other forces, other services about what morale is like, how's law enforcement feeling in Canada these days?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. And, you know, I'm very proud. I get to represent, we're almost at 8,700 members of the Toronto Police Service. They're police officers, about 5,600, but we also have special constables, parking officers, people that answer 911, and all the jobs in between. And I'm really proud to represent them. We just came back from the Canadian Police Association meetings. We're members of the board of directors there. So we get a pretty good sense of what's going on across the country. So I'll say across the country, morale is suffering a bit, and a lot of it has to do with bail, something I'm sure we're going to get to in later in the podcast, and really where our members are out there doing their part. And there's been a feeling over about a decade that the federal government in particular isn't doing their part. In Toronto, we're lucky. We've started to see a reinvesting in public safety in this city. Our numbers are starting to head in the right direction. We're not there yet. As you can still see, there's people waiting on hold for 911, waiting for a police officer to attend, those types of things. But we're heading in the right direction. So in some ways, we're morale's starting to improve, but others, it's really starting to deteriorate in the Toronto Police Service.
You know, one of the things I've noticed, Clayton, and I don't mean this as an unflattering comparison, but one of the things I've noticed, I'm a lifelong Toronto area guy, either City of Toronto or the 905 around it. One of the things I've noticed just as a citizen in recent years is that law enforcement response has become unpredictable. Some days it's fantastic. Other days it's not.
Yep.
And during COVID, it's a long, winding story, and I'll skip most of it. But I ended up finding a guy on my property who was not a threat. He was an older man with some kind of dementia. And he was wandering my property saying, I don't know where I am. My son didn't pick me up. And he was asking me about being in Barrie, which is a city well outside Toronto. So the poor guy was just confused. And I've seen Alzheimer's, and I know what that was. And he was asking, call the police, call the police. I called the police, and the dispatcher told me, you're looking at an hour before we can get anyone to you. But then there was also an incident on our street, and it ended up being nothing. But there was concern that one of my neighbors' houses was getting broken into. There were 6 cruisers on my street in under 2 minutes. So, I couldn't have asked for a better response one night, and I was basically on my own another time. And you might know, I don't know what the difference between those 2 days were.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is we've really tried at the Toronto Police Association, so we're the union that represents the membership, but we have a lot in common with the general population. We want safe neighborhoods, we want healthy neighborhoods, we want, people pay a lot of taxes. They want to know if they call the police, there's going to be a response. The challenge is through the defund the police movement that happened several years ago, we got down to about 4,700 police officers. As an example, in 2010, there were about 5,500. And clearly the population of Toronto has grown since then and continues to grow. So we've started to see, we're about 5,600. So we're at the most police officers we've had in this city in our history, although there's still a lot of work still to do. The challenge is that it's exactly you say, it's unpredictable. There's times when there's going to be more calls for service. There's times there's going to be less. We've worked with a company to actually have data for us to say how many police officers you need at what time of the day. So when we're speaking to the mayor, we're speaking to city councilors saying we need X number of police officers, we can actually show the data. Why? It's not just, the union pounding for more members. It's, here's what you need. It's going to be a good return on your investment. And citizens deserve to be able to call 911 and have a quick response from the police, fire, or ambulance. So it's unpredictable, but because of those many years of defunding, it's just taken a long time to start to head in the right direction. But we're well on our way, in all fairness to the current City Council and Police Services Board.
Yeah, look, I do watch, because I'm emotionally broken this way. I do look on a fairly regular basis. I look at the major crime indicators for Toronto, and a lot of those arrows are going in a good direction, which is good. The bad news is those arrows going in the right direction is erasing deficit that we've accumulated in recent years when a lot of those arrows are going in the wrong direction.
Yep.
And I can believe, statistically speaking, that Toronto is safer than it was last year. I would be surprised if it was safer than it was 5 or 10 years ago. Yeah. And let me ask you in big picture terms, what is this is going to be hard for you to answer, so be as vague as you need to be, but what is the nature of the crime problem in Toronto these days? What are your officers actually spending their time responding to?
We respond to everything you could imagine and under the sun, right? From something simple as a theft, although we've really worked with the Police Services Board over the last number of years to have special constables doing certain things. The citizens deserve a good return on their investment. They deserve to find efficiencies and all that. So we have worked with the Police Services Board to have, as an example, special constables doing things. But the biggest issue in this city still is really high-profile violence. And if it's the carjackings, the shootings, the home invasions, things that really impact regular people, people have that fear to go about their daily lives. And you make a great point. Yes, crime indexes are down from 24 to 25. But if you do go back in history, they're still quite high. But I always want to give credit where credit's due, and the investment from the city to start to put more police officers out on the ground, boots on the ground, investigators, G&G units, to actually tackle this crime is headed in the right direction, but still a long ways to go. So I think the biggest frustration and fear across the city is repeat violent offenders, where our members are doing their part. The citizens are fearful sometimes to report, right? Why are you going to give information that may result in someone being arrested, only to see them back out in your community a short time later. So it's that really high-profile violence that's impacting the city and the members I serve.
Something I've observed as a citizen, and a little bit as a journalist, because I've looked into this, but mostly as a citizen. And I don't intend this as a criticism of your members, because as you said a few minutes ago that your members are also members of the community, and I'm wondering if they're feeling some of this too. There has been, I think, an erosion in confidence in not specifically necessarily law enforcement or law enforcement officers, but in general, the ability of the state to keep a lid on things. Because you hear, and again, this is something you've mentioned that's being worked on, but you hear about carjackings or car thefts disappearing out of driveways. You hear about home invasions, petty crime. And I've reported on this already. Something I've never seen in my life popping up in Toronto has been private security forces patrolling wealthier neighborhoods.
Yep.
And like societally speaking, that's not good. Like that's not the way you want to be going. But when I saw it, I wasn't shocked to see it. What have you guys heard from the public about where the public's mind is about the state of things?
I mean, you raise a great point. If you call 911 right now, and at times we're over 10 minutes just to get through to 911. And then once you get through to 911, you're another, on average, 1 point was 22 minutes to have a police officer attend. And that is for priority 1 radio calls. Those are for like assaults in progress, shootings, robberies, home invasions actually happening. So you get on that phone, you call, by the time you get through and have a police officer come to your door as a half an hour, of course people are going to start to lose trust. And if you have the financial means to do it, you do hire private security. But that's not fair. Everybody deserves the same level of policing across the city. And so I think that's why there was so much public pressure to start reinvesting, where we're up about 1,300 members in the service. Like I said, we're not there yet, and the public deserves better service than they're getting, but at least we're headed in the right direction. But when you go through a period of time where you do not fund the police, you do not hire, you drop in numbers while the population and demand goes up, you can see why there was a mistrust from the public. But I think public safety is a top priority, not only in Toronto, but I hear from my colleagues across Canada right now. It is if not the highest, maybe in the top 2 or 3 issues facing Canadians currently.
I think one of the things I would mention again as a citizen, and it's interesting, and I'm just curious, like what your members would think about this, or what you've seen yourself. One of the things, and it's not strictly a law enforcement matter, but one of the things that I've observed as living in Toronto in or around Toronto most of my life, and living in my current house in Toronto for more than 10 years now, have been visible signs of decay in the community. And look, I'm not going to ask you about potholes or overflowing trash cans, right? Like that's other part of the municipal government. But what I would call kind of baseline disorder, drunks getting into fights on the streets, brawls breaking out on the subway, non-violent but still very unpleasant verbal encounters in public places. Yep. I've seen a lot of that stuff, and I don't know if that shows up in your crime indicators all the time, because I've told the story before, but when some guy took a swing at me on the TDC for absolutely no reason, I shrugged it off because it wasn't much of a swing, and I went about my day, and I never called it in.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people with similar stories here. So you talked about the high-level violent crime. What are you hearing from members more just about low-level violent crime or just disorder in general?
Well, I mean, go for a walk in downtown Toronto. I was testifying at the House of Commons Committee on bail reform and some other criminal justice reforms just this past week. And I said, if anybody has a concern, wants to learn about open drug use, take a look at safe injection sites or people living in tents and parks, come for a ride along. We'll get you in a police car. We'll take you around and you can see actually what's going on in the city of Toronto. And you make a very good point. All crime isn't reported. And when you don't have a feeling that there's going to be someone to respond or actually investigate it, or you just think it's not worth it, or you see it all the time, it's not reported to the police, so it may not necessarily show up in those crime reports. But that's why I think the perception and how people feel is even at times more important than the actual crime numbers. Like you want to feel that you can walk down the street or walk down with your family or your kids without being accosted, having people laying in the streets, openly using drugs in a safe manner. So that is even more important. And I think when you take a look at polling you're seeing across, not just in Canada, the fear of safety is not, it's high. And people don't feel safe in the streets, and that's why you need to see police officers in the TTC around there. You need to have people walking the beat, our neighborhood officers, and being able to respond to service. So it's a great point you make, and it's one of those. It's a tough stat to actually capture.
And one of the other things that is going to be hard to capture in a stat, but I know for a fact it's happening, is that. So I'm born in Toronto and I live in Toronto, but I spent a big part of my life in Richmond Hill, which is just north of the city. It's in the 905 right north of it. And in Richmond Hill, which is part of York Region, there's been a ton of relatively high-profile crimes lately. There's been smash and grab robberies in grocery stores. There's been some violent home invasions. There's been some horrible killings. And that does not fall in the Toronto Police Service's service area. That is not captured by City of Toronto crime statistics. But it is sure as hell covered on Toronto news. And you wake up in the morning and you're having your cup of tea or coffee and you've got the news on and you're hearing guy shot in front of his family and you know it's only about 15 minutes away from you. You don't care what side of Steeles Avenue that crime happened on. It affects your sense of safety and of your family's safety, even if it doesn't show up in Toronto's crime stats. And I think to an extent, that's true of the entire country. People are hearing about people being set on fire in Vancouver. They're hearing about terrible stabbings in Edmonton. Yeah. I know some of this is media perception. Like I'm mature enough about my own industry to know that. But I'm also telling you, at no prior time in my life have I known as many people who are buying firearms, putting advanced security systems into their house, getting doors that are supposed to be difficult to kick down, even if it's only perception. I think you said it already, Clayton. Perception matters.
It absolutely matters. And you're seeing, I'll take the home invasions. When I was a police officer on the road and didn't have the real fortune to do this job, when I was answering the radio calls, it was a lot of teenagers just doing joyriding, right? They'd steal their parents' car, or they may break into a neighbor's car and drive it around and ditch it somewhere. This is coordinated, organized crime. And it was also targeting areas of the city that may not have been used to crime. They were targeting high-end cars, SUVs, trucks. So they were kicking in people's doors in areas that hadn't experienced it. But when people see it on the news, they can see themselves in that situation. There was that horrible rape of the little kid, 3 years old, I think it was, down in St. Catharines, that happened
near Niagara.
In Niagara. And people can think, oh, can you imagine someone breaking into my house in the middle of the night? Anybody that has a parent, has kids, or someone kicking in that front door, or the father defending his family in York Region who was murdered. So it's something that we can put ourselves in that place. And as you know, in the GTA, it's all kind of just one big city. If it's in Oshawa to Niagara Falls to wherever, it's all the same. And so just because it's not happening in Toronto, Toronto News happens to cover it just because there's the availability to do it. But that's really, I think, continues to amplify that fear that people are feeling right now around public safety.
You mentioned a few minutes ago, back when you were in uniform, and it was a lot of dumb teenagers doing stupid stuff. And I would know nothing about that. But
me either.
Of course, I didn't mean to imply that. Can you tell me a little bit, though, what you said a minute ago about crime, including by youths, being part of organized crime? I have talked with some of the Toronto Police Service officers about this. I don't want to ask too leading a question, but I guess I'll feed you a little bit of where I'm going. Criminal organizations are using the underaged because they know basically it's almost literally a get out of jail free card. Yep. And some of these people below the age of 18 have been resorting to pretty shocking levels of violence.
It is, and again, so we are supporting increased sentences and bail improvements, and even opening up the Youth Criminal Justice Act. We're not talking about a mistake that you get caught with marijuana, or you steal that, I'm going to say CD or tape, that's how long ago for me, from the store, and you get caught, or whatever. We're not talking about that. We're talking about some youths involved in murders and shootings and home invasions. And I was really taken back. Chief Myron Demke mentioned a few weeks ago, I think there's 13 youths charged with murder in the city this year, and 102 illegal firearms seized after use. Like, that is unheard of. Not to mention there was a 12-year-old charged with a murder in downtown Toronto, was running around with a person that was out on bail with a hammer and assaulting people and killed one person. So, yeah, there needs to be some changes to the Youth Criminal Justice Act. I will say it's something I hadn't thought of till I was in Ottawa this past week. And a member of the Bloc Québécois Party asked, would you support increased sentences for those adults that recruit youth to be involved in offenses? That should be looked at as a mitigating, not a mitigating factor, but a factor to increase sentencing or a separate charge. And I said, absolutely. You know, they're being taken advantage of, and it is organized crime. Under the Youth Criminal Justice Act, I believe the longest you can serve in jail for a murder is 4 years. So, yeah, the people that are recruiting these youth should also be held to a higher standard. And it was something I hadn't thought of, but we clearly would support.
I mentioned to you before we started rolling here that I come from a long line of cops, including a whole heap of Toronto cops. And one of the things that I've heard around the dinner table, most of my law enforcement relatives have passed on now. They were more of my grandparents' generation. Some of my cousins and stuff did go into law enforcement, but mostly outside Toronto. And one of the things I do remember hearing around the table many years ago was that law enforcement officers, frontline guys out there in uniform, were dealing with basically two different categories of daily calls. One of them was things that probably should have been handled by the mental health care system or the hospitals. And then others were actual genuine criminals. And then even in that genuine criminal category, there were two categories. There were low-level idiots who are probably never going to hurt anyone, and maybe you're never going to offend again. And then there was a smaller group of hardened, violent, repeat offenders.
Yep.
One of the things I was told years ago by someone who was in uniform when I was in journalism at a senior level, but had known my family members, told me people would be shocked to know. I think Toronto at the time had 2.5 million people. Mm-hmm. He said 95% of violent crime in the city is committed by the same 300 or 400 people.
Yep.
And we pretty much know who they are.
Yep.
We've got really good intelligence on them, and we can arrest these guys till the cows come home. They're not staying behind bars. And I think at the time, the concern was more relatively short criminal sentences. Someone would go to prison for 3 or 4 years. Now they're not even making it to prison before they're back on the streets.
Yep.
Without giving me any intelligence I'm not supposed to have, does that general dynamic still basically apply to Toronto, where a large percentage of crime is committed by a very small group of repeat offenders?
You're absolutely bang on. And and I'll say I come from a really proud lineage of policing too. My great uncle was the chief of police in the small town I grew up in, Powassan. If any of your listeners know it, I'll be surprised, but from a very small town. My dad's a retired staff sergeant. Both my brothers work for the Durham Police Service, and my wife is a detective with Toronto. So very proud policing family. But you're absolutely right. It is a small number. I'm not sure what the number would be. Wouldn't be surprised if it was under 1,000 number of individuals.
Sounds about right.
It's horrible, committing violence all the time. And what we find is one of the highest number of charges laid with someone with a firearm, so you're caught with a gun in the street, is failing to comply. So you're already out and you're involved in a firearm offense. It is not uncommon to see people that have shot somebody to be back out in the street all the time. And so that's the frustrating part, is that our members are doing their job. Right? They're arresting these really violent individuals and putting their own lives on the line. Like, as you mentioned, there's mental health does take a lot of the calls. There's the low level criminals or people with addiction problems. But we're talking when you're trying to tackle this violent crime, I would call epidemic, when you're putting your lives on the line. Or our gangs and gun unit, think of this. They are putting their lives on the line, but they're also spending a lot of resources, money, time, and effort to do these massive investigations, to only see these gang members back out on the street in the same week, to do it all over again. That's the biggest problem. So when we've talked about bail reform or toughing sentences, we are talking about just a small number of individuals that are causing havoc in the streets of Toronto. And I'm sure if you went around the country, all the major cities, even small towns, it's just a small number of individuals. They're really causing the fear, the havoc, the violence that we're seeing in our streets, and we just need to tackle that, and everything else is manageable.
So I want to talk with you about the bail thing, but I want to just defer that one more minute because I actually do want to talk specifically about the mental health element just for a second. I told you a few minutes ago that I was reducing my carbon footprint, and I was riding the subway downtown instead of driving, and there was a guy walking up and down the train, clearly having some kind of episode.
Yeah.
And we were pulling into, I think it was Osgood Station, right downtown. And as the train was coming to a stop, the guy just started shoving people, grabbing their, like a woman was reading a book. He grabbed the book, threw it in the air, shoved a woman, and the woman fell down. Luckily, she wasn't hurt. And I was standing by the door, and the guy took a swing at me to try and hit me. And he did, but it was kind of just a glancing blow. It just kind of bounced off. And then the guy ran off the train, and like the lady who had been knocked down got helped up. The lady who'd had her book thrown got her book back. And then like I got off the train and I went and I got a hot dog and then I went to work. Like it was like no one even really commented on it because it happens a lot. Yeah. I don't think that guy belongs in prison. Like I look at that guy as we've probably failed him. We should not be allowing people who are having those kinds of episodes to go out there and hurt themselves and hurt other people. If one of your members does pick up a guy like that, you and I have spoken about bail. We'll talk about more bail in a minute. When it's purely a mental health issue and someone gets picked up, what happens then? Where does that person go?
Yeah, it's a broken system. I can tell you that. So, I mean, every police officer, I would say, if I never had to go to just a mental health call again for the rest of my career, I'm good with it. The challenge is that when it comes to someone with a weapon or violence, assaultive, or needs to be apprehended, the police are the only ones with the tools to do it, because obviously, unfortunately, when someone's involved in, they're mentally unwell or in crisis, sometimes they can be violent. But so if someone's not in that case, you're not going to lay a criminal charge. But I will say, arresting somebody can put them into, force them to get help. Yeah. There's mental health courts, so that's part of it. But if we bring them to the hospital, an officer would bring them to a local emergency room. They'd be assessed by a doctor. They may be held. They're often just released. There's really nowhere to put these people, and then they're put back out on the streets. There's shelters. Some of them don't want to be in shelters. So I think overall, the police only get involved when everything else has failed, and we're not the answer to fix that. But clearly, there's an issue, and the officers are very frustrated. They're often, and if you ask paramedics as well, they're stuck in the hospital waiting to hand somebody over, and there's calls to service. You're listening on the radio. There's people needing help. There's break and enters. There's all these things going on. And you're sitting with this person at the hospital, which is really, it's a medical issue. It's not a crime. So, I don't have all the answers. Policing is a part of it, but there's clearly an issue with what's going on with mental health across the country, but definitely in Toronto.
Yeah, I had over the summer, there was a medical emergency in my family, and one of my loved ones had to be taken to hospital by ambulance. And when I was with them at sort of the paramedic bay of the hospital, it was a big Metro Toronto hospital. It was a bunch of young people who are obviously like they've got ice packs on their face, or they've got a splinter on their arm, or they're bleeding, and some older people with IVs or things. Yeah. And then there was a wall of your members surrounding about 5 or 6 other guys at the other side of the bay. And it was real obvious who those guys were. And just because I was bored, I was just talking with some of your guys and some of the paramedics. And I'm like, repeat customers here? And one of the cops looked at me. He said, every one of them. It's like, we know these guys on a first name basis. Like, oh, okay, Mike, again. All right, we're going to slap the cuffs on you. We're going to take you, it's cuffs on you. We'll take you to the hospital. And I said, how long? I said to one of the paramedics, how long till these guys are cycling through? And he says, most of them, it'll be a few days. That one I don't recognize, so it might be a while. But some of these guys could easily be back here by tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a huge problem, and I certainly don't blame the nurses or ER nurses. That's got to be one of the toughest jobs in the world. I mean, they've got patients, they're dealing with chaos in there, but there's clearly, it's broken where you have, I'll just speak for our members, paramedics will have similar concerns, but someone's arrested under the Mental Health Act or apprehended under the Mental Health Act. You're just trying to get them somewhere for treatment, and you're sitting there in the hospital for hours. So This has been a problem that's gone on since I was a new officer 25 years ago. We still talk about it, but it is really impacts efficiency and just, our members could be doing something better, but they're the only ones really there at the time to do anything.
You know what? Before we talk about bail in a minute, we'll take a quick break, but I'll end on this note. I actually, Clayton, you won't be shocked to know this. I've had the opportunity to talk with nurses. I've talked with paramedics. I've even talked with crowns. Crowns don't talk much, crown prosecutors. It's really hard to get them to talk. But occasionally I charm them and some of them might actually talk with me. And one of the things I find absolutely fascinating is I know that paramedics and nurses and cops and crowns might all disagree about some of the details, but literally everyone agrees in the big picture, which is that I asked like a crown, I said, what percentage of your caseload is low level repeat customers? And they told me 75% at least, where, oh, okay, you're back. All right, we'll plea this one out to something, or we'll just withdraw the charges because there's no court resources to deal with you. Even if we get you a courtroom, there's gonna be nowhere in either a mental health facility or a provincial jail or a federal penitentiary, nowhere for you to go. It's not worth my time to actually prosecute you because the process is doomed before it even begins. These people just get let out. And I said, that's 75% of your workload? I said, yeah, thereabouts. And when you've got police officers, you've got paramedics, you've got nurses, and you've got crown prosecutors all agreeing on the big picture problem here, and yet we're not fixing it, I start to get worried. So stick around. We're going to come back. Clayton Campbell is my guest. He's going to stick around with me. We're going to be right back in a moment. We are going to talk about what some of those fixes might look like. This is On the Line. This episode of On the Line is also brought to you by the Daily Bread Food Bank. Imagine choosing between food, rent, or medicine. For the 1.5 million Canadians with disabilities living in poverty, that is the daily reality. The Canada Disability Benefit was created to help, but at less than $7 a day, it isn't enough. Daily Bread Food Bank and coalition partners are urging government to fully fund the benefit. Visit fundthebenefit.ca to take action. Together, we can ensure every Canadian with a disability has the dignity of food and security. Here we are. We're back. It is On the Line. My guest, Clayton Campbell, president of the Toronto Police Association, the union that represents the Toronto Police Services members. We've been circling around this a bunch, and it's come up organically like a half dozen times already because it's one of the only things we ought to talk about, and it's time we do. Bail. What's going on with bail? Why? You mentioned a few minutes ago that like a huge number of shootings in this city are people who are fail to comply, which is the legal terminology for you have not complied with your bail conditions. I can tell you as a working journo in this city, Clayton, that it is almost now a joke in our group chats. Oh, did someone fail to comply? Mm-hmm. It's because when the releases get out of like someone's been arrested, someone's been charged, your eyes just scan down the press release and you're looking for, oh, okay, failed to comply with 12 different release conditions. Yeah. And then when these people aren't youths, when you actually have someone who's 18 or over, you just drop their name into the Toronto Police Service archive. You can just search the website or you search news and you're like, oh, okay, this is the guy who shot up at the diner 4 years ago and was sentenced, but he's back out. Now he just got picked up again. What is, to your view, well, I'm going to rephrase that. How the hell do we fix this? That's the question, really. How the hell do we fix this?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we've lobbied for. I think that it starts with leadership from the federal government. There are some clear changes that need to be made to the criminal code. We saw over the past number of years under I'll call it the Trudeau Liberals, because I'll move to we have had some success in having discussions with the Carney Liberals, but for as long as I've been at the association, which is 7 years, we've lobbied for changes, some simple changes to the criminal code to make sure we kept repeat violent offenders in custody. Because as you mentioned, and we've talked about, it is a small number of violent individuals causing all the issues. Very small number with illegal firearms or involved in violence. So We lobbied, nothing changed. Actually, things like Bill C-75 were brought in that made things even easier to release people. So we had an election. We have the new Carney Liberal, called the new Carney Liberals. So we have had an opportunity to meet with the Attorney General, Sean Fraser, who met with the Public Safety Minister many times, talked to him both in formal settings and in informal settings about the things we need. We've also met with Pierre Poilievre. We've met with Larry Brock, who's the Shadow Minister of Justice. We've provided the same information to both sides. We've said, look, I get there's politics involved here, and we may not see eye to eye. The things we may want or the Conservatives or Liberals want may not perfectly align, but let's get something done here, because there are just some small changes around sureties, around increased sentences. You saw the Conservatives came with the 3 strikes and you're out type clause around failing to comply. Talked about changing some of the secondary grounds, and that's the thing justices and JPs and judges would use to keep people in custody. Some minor modifications there would allow people to, really the judges and JPs, to keep people in custody when they really should be.
When we keep people in custody, my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm pretty confident in this, one of the problems we have is capacity in the holding facilities. One of the reasons I'm told that we are letting a lot of people out is because really effectively there's nowhere to put them here. And as I had one very weary corrections official told me, we can't even build housing in this country. How am I going to look showing up with a proposal to spend millions of dollars on a nice piece of real estate to build a jail? And my understanding is, I don't know if this is Toronto specific or national or whatever, but a lot of the reasons judges are letting people go, maybe even against their better judgment, is because there's not really a place to put them right now. Is anyone talking about that issue? And I know that like some of that's going to be federal, a lot of that's going to be provincial, because the provinces would usually be running that part of the system. Are we going to build enough cells to keep these guys in?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a provincial component to this, and what I said when we were at the House of Commons last week was, the federal government do your part, which is you can change the legislation. Maybe there needs to be funding to the province to support this legislation. With Premier Ford, he's been probably the best premier we've ever had in the province when it comes to public safety. And I've mentioned to any of the MPs, I said, if you want a cell phone number, it's basically out anywhere. Give them a call and let's try to sort this out. The municipality plays a part, right? The municipality has to make sure there's funds to respond to those calls. And so, what I don't want to see is finger pointing. I want to say, listen, things need to get done. Work together and get these things done. The first step, I think, is to change the criminal code. Take a look at the Youth Criminal Justice Act. Take a look at how sureties is a huge issue with how sureties are allowed to post bail for people and let them out when they at times have criminal records or have been unreliable in the past. So let's look at those changes. And of course, the province has a role to play and the municipality as well. But let's get the criminal code changes done first and start going from there.
If we were doing a better job actually keeping people either behind bars pending, hopefully a speedy trial, because trial delays are a big problem we have.
Yep.
But if we were doing a better job at that, and if we were doing a better job at keeping people who should be locked away for a long time, and these are neither of these things are we doing a good job at, I have to imagine that a lot of our problems would be solved here. And I've lived in the era, you mentioned this already, I've lived through defund the police. I've lived through the era of root causes, right? If we can fix root causes till the cows come home, but if we've only got 1,000 bad guys in the biggest city in the country and they just keep getting out over and over, even if we never generate a new criminal again, we're gonna have to deal with the ones that we got for the next 50 or 60 years. I confess to you, Clayton, I am deeply frustrated by our inability to solve what ought to be fairly easily solved problems. This is not landing on the moon. This is putting away someone who's been convicted of a violent crime for a long enough time to segregate that person from society.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I'd love to see the stats. We have people in and out and in and out and in and out and in and out of custody. If we just kept them in, like, do we gain any more prisoners? Is it really going to impact capacity? And the other part of it is deterrence. Part of having punishment and sentences in place is to deter people, right? There's the punishment component, but it's to deter. So could it be that you may prevent some people from doing some things? Like, there's a lot of things to consider. I think you just think, well, we're going to make it longer sentences, so we're going to have more people in custody, maybe. But maybe you're just keeping those small number in custody. And I can't imagine the cost savings of all the policing costs, the costs through the judicial system to run these trials, and the victimization. And that was one thing I really tried to make clear in Ottawa, is that there's an innocence until proven guilty. There's the charter. We support all that. But when are we going to start putting victims and communities first? And yes, could there be a cost associated with more prison space? Yeah, but we need to protect the community. People don't feel safe. You talked about your interactions downtown. Anybody can walk downtown and they don't feel safe right now. So there may be some investment in it, but part of the job of government and public safety is to keep people safe and help them feel safe in their daily lives and allow them to go about it. So I'd like to see how that would actually unfold. It may be that we just keep the real small number, if it's 1,000 people, in jail.
I'm 6'4" and I'm stubborn, and I don't hesitate to go downtown. My wife's 5'3" and not nearly as stubborn. She's more stubborn than she thinks she is, but she's not nearly as stubborn as I am, and she doesn't like going downtown anymore, and I don't blame her.
Yep, sure. Two police officers, my wife and I, when we're off duty, you walk downtown and you have that sense of fear. You see people acting in a certain way, or open drug use and those sorts of things. And the people they pay taxes. They deserve the ability to feel safe in their community. And so everybody can point fingers at different levels of government. I have to say the municipality has stepped up as of late. There's been, under the new police services board, some really good investment. The province is always supportive with stuff. And so, the federal government, their role is to change the criminal code. So I think there's some simple changes. We'll see. It seems like there's a lot of interest. I can say that we are at least now having conversations. For my previous 7 years at the association, we didn't have any consultation with the federal Liberals. So at least they're listening, and we'll see what they can deliver later on this fall.
You talk about deterrence. There's the opposite to deterrence, which is like, maybe philosophically speaking, there would be some exactly neutral position between deterring crime and almost encouraging it. Mm-hmm. But I think wherever we are now, we're encouraging it, right? Because, the idea that a criminal out there might be like, you know what, if we do this, there's a pretty good chance we're going to get arrested. And if we get arrested, there's a pretty good chance we're going to get convicted. And if we get convicted, there's a pretty good chance we're going to be sentenced. Right now, all the calculus is reversed. There's a pretty good chance they won't be. There's a shockingly high chance, even if they are arrested, that they'll be released. And even if they are eventually convicted, it's probably not going to be for that long. I won't be able to go into details here because I'm working on a story right now. It's still going through what we call the lawyering stage, which is really fun.
I have to go through that too here at the association.
Yeah, I know. So, yeah. I love lawyers, but oh my God. Sometime in the next few weeks, assuming the lawyers say yes, the Line will be bringing our readers and our listeners a story, and I've already said this publicly on the radio, the details of which actually made me cry. And I have been doing this job for almost 20 years, and I am pretty dead inside. It takes a lot to get through what is through my armor to what's left of my soul. Yeah. The details of this story rip my heart out. And I knew going into it that the person who had committed this horrible crime had been sentenced. And I had been told he had been sentenced to what was considered to be a long sentence. The courts were so appalled by the nature of the crime that they sentenced him to a lopsidedly severe sentence. Mm-hmm. It was shockingly short. Mm-hmm. And me, being the naive idiot I'm thinking, well, this guy will never see the light of day. He will never set foot outside of a penitentiary again. A mid-ranked sitcom lasts longer than this guy's time behind bars. Yeah. And the bail part of it is really, really important, and I think that's where a lot of the political focus is right now. I also, look, I'm no hippie, but I would go so far as to say there's probably people who we cycle through the criminal justice system that maybe we should be diverting other places. But there's also a lot of people that we should lock away forever, and we aren't.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I'm interested to see your story, so please share it with us when it comes out. We try to, and sometimes I ask myself, why do I keep talking about bail? And it's because I'm never going to stop. because something needs to change, and I'm going to keep talking about it until something changes. But this past weekend, we were at the Canadian Police and Peace Officers Memorial, where we honor the police officers that have died, defending the country, including some of our members. And so I was there and the name Michael Sweet will mean something to people in Toronto. He was murdered 45 years ago, and I'm sitting across the table with Michael Sweet's daughter, and she has to go every year to keep, I'm not even going to use their name, that cop killer in jail every year and be re-victimized. And that needs to change. Why do we have a cop killers, it should be in jail for life? We heard about Paul Bernardo as an example, where they moved to a medium security prison. So, I think the public has had it, and I think everybody talking about it has really put a lot of pressure on the government to get something done. But if it's someone out on bail or someone with a short sentence that's back out to re-victimize again, people that have murdered people, they're then back out to shoot somebody else. It's just horrific stuff. Or the little kid that I mentioned, it was at St. Catharines or Niagara, that was allegedly sexually assaulted by someone that served 6 months or something for a previous sexually assault involving a neighbor. It's ridiculous. So, and again, and I often get criticized about, it's just tough on crime. It's not tough on crime. It's tough on a small number of really violent, disgusting thugs and criminals that should never roam the streets in Toronto or any city in Canada that we want to see behind bars. And that's what we're really pushing for.
If you're an activist who wants to defund the police or to have massive police reform or move to a non-carceral system, it's in your best interest to lock the truly violent people away, because they otherwise ruin your argument.
Sure.
You are never going to convict society to go easier on the low-level guys if that ends up getting conflated with the guy. Again, it's all before the courts, but I know the story you're talking about down near Niagara, where a young kid sexually assaulted, reportedly, in their bed at night by someone with a history of this. And then you come along and you're trying to sell the public on, well, we should be smart on crime. The public is going to grab their pitchfork or their shotgun, and they're going to ignore what you said. You would have seen this, and I know this falls outside your immediate jurisdiction in Toronto, but there was a big protest outside either the remand center or the court. I don't remember what it was, but it was where that person had been taken. Do you know how hard it is to get 300 Canadians to show up and protest something?
No, you're right. And these are regular citizens. These are regular citizens that are out there demanding change. And, it's unfortunate it's come to that. Or you saw the 8-year-old that was shot, Javiah, that was shot in his bed, sleeping beside his mom in the middle of the night, talking about going to a birthday party the next day. Shot by, and there's allegedly, but there are 3 youths, all with illegal firearms, out on bail, allegedly involved in this offense, in a gunfight that causes this 8-year-old to be murdered. There's so many examples of it. And I think it's just important I'm going to keep pounding the message until there's some change. Obviously, our members, police officers, have been shot and killed by people out on bail. So obviously I advocate for the members I serve, but I feel that because we're so aligned with the community, I'm advocating for them as well.
I want to ask you one more question, and I showed tremendous discipline. I saved it for last, even though I love this topic. Okay. I want to talk with you about the gun confiscation plan that's coming out of the federal government here. A series of police forces across the country have said publicly that they have no intention of enforcing that, and that's weird. You do not see Canadian police forces take that stand in public. Now, I'm mature enough to know that there are often words behind the scenes, but actual public statements. And then it's not just law enforcement agencies. I'm seeing solicitors general in provincial capitals. I'm seeing premiers go, this is a complete waste of time and we're not going to enforce this. My opinion is on the record. It's a complete waste of time and we should not be trying to enforce this. I think this is not only a stupid idea, I think it's counterproductive. I think it's going to make the problem worse. I have not heard officially anything from the Toronto Police Service about what their intentions are. You don't speak for the service, you just speak for the membership. What do you think of the plan, the Liberal plan to confiscate firearms from currently lawful owners?
That gun buyback program will essentially have zero impact on the crime we're seeing in this city. The gun crime we're seeing in this city is committed by a small number of individuals using illegal firearms. These illegal firearms usually come across from the US. About 90%, we seized about 700 in 2024, but 90% came across from the US. They're often used by people out on bail or with firearm prohibitions.
Yeah.
This is not going to have any impact on the violence we're seeing in the city. The cost, what I'm hearing, is $750 million. And I said this when I was in Ottawa last week. I said, call Olivia Chow, call Myron Demke, who's the chief of Toronto Police, and myself. The three of us can sit down and give us a fraction of that money, and we'll be able to do some things in the city that'll actually help public safety and keep bad guys in custody. This is only targeting legal gun owners and will have no impact here in the city. And what was frustrating for me, and again, I don't want to get ahead of myself, the Carney Liberals, we have had good conversations around bail and parole and all that, but it was very disappointing that this was essentially, although there was another piece of legislation, but essentially the biggest thing that came forward to fight crime was essentially taking guns from lawful gun owners and not targeting the bad guys that are causing havoc in the city.
The way this program is designed, it's not going to do anything but create more criminals. Because my guess, knowing some of these guys, is that there will be compliance on this is going to be as close to zero as will be measurable to human science.
Yep.
And I'm trying to imagine, could I design a policy that would be more counterproductive? Give me a few hours and a six-pack, I could probably come up with something.
Yeah, we'll do it together.
Yeah. Well, then we'd better get 2 six-packs. But this was something the Carney government could and should have let die as one of those Trudeau-era holdovers. And I get the politics of it. They could have just said, oh, yeah, we're going to get right on that. And then, oops, another parliamentary session went by. We couldn't quite get it to the top of the list. They could have smothered this thing in neglect. Instead, they've put it right at the top of the agenda. I think Clayton, I think you've done a good job drawing a line between Trudeau Liberals and Carney Liberals. Mm-hmm. What I find really disappointing about this one is that Carney had the opportunity to walk away from this. Mm-hmm. Instead, he adopted it and he made it his own. I think it's his first really stupid mistake, and I don't think it'll go well for him. And I'm waiting to see what the Toronto Police end up saying, but I was interested to see the OPP go, we're not going to enforce this, because the OPP, geographically, they are serving the largest area. And if they're not going to bother, I don't see how this becomes practical in Ontario.
So first of all, I've made it very clear with the public safety minister. I've told him to his face and in other correspondence, publicly to his face and privately, that this gun buyback program isn't going to help Toronto. He's a Toronto MP, so I think he must know that. I'm not aware of any plan in Toronto. Obviously, the operations are Chief Myron Demke. I'm not aware of any plan, and quite frankly, I don't know how we would do this. And it would create a huge amount of resources have to be dedicated to taking guns from lawful, law-abiding citizens versus bad guys that are out in the street. And the other thing it could do is it could put my members in direct conflict with people that are just law-abiding citizens. You can think of the horrible scenarios that could play out. Like, what are we going to people's doors and we're doing search warrants? And I mean, it's just there's so many issues with it. I agree with you. I wish it would have been parked and left alone. And again, taking that money, give it to the municipalities and let us actually do some things to help with public safety. A few extra officers walking the TTC wouldn't hurt, as an example. We will see. We've made our position clear. It'll be ineffective, and to use other things and prioritize bail and some of the other things we talked about.
Clayton, thank you for your time. Really appreciate this. Good to have you on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Always welcome to come back.
That was Clayton Campbell, president of the Toronto Police Association, the union that represents the officers and support staff for the Toronto Police Service. Another episode of On the Line in the books, folks. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, check us out at readtheline.ca. Whatever you watched or listened to this on, like us there. Leave us a nice review. Subscribe to us so you'll get more updates. And stay tuned, because the Line podcast will be coming up on Friday. And On the Line will be back next week.